basically just some new content. You know, hardware is still hardware, and operating systems are still operating systems. There's just a few basic changes that are considered more major. We'll cover the new topics in the 800 series exam. We'll discuss briefly why CompTIA is using the new item types that they are calling performance-based testing. I will give you some examples of new item types. Don't expect me to actually launch one. I don't have access to them outside of taking a live exam, but I will discuss with you kind of what I feel like they are, and what CompTIA has let us know through some stuff that they have released, and I'm going to talk about that a bit later too. And then finally, I'm going to give you a few pointers on some CompTIA references that we found that might help you prepare for the CompTIA exams, and also to prepare your classroom if you are an instructor. In comparing the 700 series and the 800 series, the 2-exam pass requirement for the A+ certification remains unchanged. In other words, as all of you know, it's always been 2 exams. In the 300 series, it was 2. In the 600 series, it was 2. But of course, as many of you know, that second test could have been one of 3. But there is still a 2-exam requirement. In the 700 series exams, there were 2 exams, 220-701, the essentials exam, and 220-702, the practical applications exam. In 220-701, candidates answered knowledge-based questions on computer hardware, computer troubleshooting and maintenance, networking, security, and operational procedures. And then in 220-702, candidates took those basic concepts that were covered in the 220-701 exam, and they applied that knowledge to technique-based questions regarding computer hardware, operating systems, networking, and security. There wasn't a real fine, bold line that divided the 2 exams. And for that reason, test candidates often took those exams within hours or days of each other because of the overlapping nature of the basic knowledge needed. And once you memorize certain characteristics of hardware, that also applies. It applies across both exams, so you didn't have a lot of relearning or new knowledge you needed. All the questions in those 2 exams were single answer or multiple answer, multiple choice questions. And while some questions had exhibits, they were more of an informative nature so that you could see a network or so that you could see the ports you were looking at, that kind of thing. For the 800 series exams, there are still 2 exams. They are 220-801 and 220-802. They are no longer known as the essentials and the practical applications names because by the restructuring of the content of these exams, those names cannot be used. For 220-801, the candidates will answer knowledge-based questions on computer hardware, networking, laptops, printers, and operational procedures. Now, in this exam, candidates can apply the basic knowledge that they've learned to some technique-based questions, but the technique-based questions will only be on the installation and configuration of hardware, networking, laptops, and printers. When a person takes 220-802, the candidates will answer knowledge-based questions on operating systems, security, and mobile devices. And then they also will have to apply basic knowledge to technique-based questions regarding troubleshooting computer hardware, networking, laptops, printers, and operating systems. So as you can see, while there are some topics from 220-801 in 220-802, there is also new content in 220-802. So if you just prepare for the 220-801, you are not also preparing for the 220-802. While more experienced candidates can actually take these exams within hours or days of each other, and when I say more experienced candidates, I've seen so many of them. I did take them one right after the other, but I also, like I said, I've had this certification since the 300 series. Less experienced candidates should have some caution, and they should give themselves time to prepare for the second exam because there's so much more new content. You got your operating systems, and then, of course, as many of you know, mobile devices is completely new. Both the 800 series exams require candidates to demonstrate proficiency in certain topic areas by performing tasks via performance-based questions. So both exams include the performance-based questions. It's not just 801 or 802. Now we're going to discuss the new topics in the 800 series. I'm just going to give a brief highlight of them right now, and then we'll go into them much deeper in some future slides. Virtualization is covered in 3 bullet points in exam 22801, and then it has a dedicated sub-objective in exam 22802. So there are 4 different areas where virtualization is covered in the 2 exams. Exam 22802 dedicates an entire objective to mobile to your enterprise, but it is covered as far as it relates to hardware and client-side virtualization. The first objective that you'll notice here is 22801, Objective 1.1. It's configure and apply BIOS settings, and underneath that it says BIOS configurations virtualization support. It's closely related to Objective 1.6 also, where you're differentiated among various CPU types, and the virtualization support is included there. The main thing that you need to understand is certain vendor BIOS versions and CPUs have actually been created to provide additional hardware support for virtualization. In its early beginnings, virtualization worked entirely through software. But with recent advances in technology, vendors have created BIOS versions and CPUs that support hardware-based virtualization. Now, if you want to implement virtualization in your enterprise, do you have to have a BIOS or a CPU that provides this level of specialization? No. You can still run software-based virtualization. But as many of you know, like special gaming graphics cards that help gaming computers perform better, having a BIOS and a CPU that provides hardware-based virtualization support will make your virtual environment much more efficient. Now, AMD and Intel provide virtualization technology that uses the hardware more efficiently and is controlled by the BIOS. But you do need to note that in most cases, the virtualization technology is disabled by default in the BIOS. 801 Objective 1.9 is the objective in the test and in the exam where they want you to understand the hardware requirements for specialized computers. And listed in these computers is things like CAD design workstations, gaming stations. You've got different types of servers listed there. And one of those computers that's listed is a virtualization workstation. The main thing that you have to understand is that you need a fast processor or multiple processors and lots of RAM. RAM is the one component in a computer that limits the number of virtual machines that you can run simultaneously. The RAM and the CPU are the 2 primary considerations when you design a virtualization computer. If it's going to host virtual machines, you need to look to the RAM and CPU, and that's the main thing. There's no numbers here because it depends on what you're going to need out of that main physical server. The final objective that you will see on virtualization is actually in the 22802 exam, the other exam, Objective 1.9. It says explains the basics of client-side virtualization, and it gives several points here. There are multiple points you've got to understand. Virtual machines are not physical computers, even though they will look like separate physical servers to any remote users. Virtualization allows administrators to install and run simultaneously multiple operating systems on a single physical computer. Each separate virtual machine can then provide separate services. So you could have a virtual machine that acts as a web server. You could have another virtual machine that is a SQL server, but they are all still one physical machine. The virtual machines are only capable of operating at the performance limits of the physical server, and the virtual machine must share the resources of the physical server. So if the physical server only has 4 gigabytes of memory, the performance of each virtual server is limited to part of that 4 gigabytes of memory. You also have to take into consideration security of each virtual machine. Simply securing the physical server is not enough. Each virtual machine will need the appropriate security, antivirus, anti-malware software configured, and they'll also need the same updates. If you just apply this software to the physical server and update it there, you are not protecting the virtual machine. Each virtual machine will also need its own network configuration if remote users will need to access that virtual machine. So they will have their own configuration. Finally, you need to understand the difference between virtual machine managers and hypervisors. Virtual machine managers are applications that run on top of a host operating system, while hypervisors is virtualization software that does not need a host operating system. Virtual machine managers, examples are VM Workstation, Virtual PC, Mac OS X Parallels, and Linux KVM. And then I have two examples of hypervisor. It's ESX and then Hyper-V. I've got a few virtualization training suggestions. I don't know how many of you are actually instructors or if you're here just to get this knowledge for yourself. The only way to learn about virtualization is to actually install it and play with it. There are a lot of products out there, both paid and free, and of course my favorite, and I think everyone's favorite, is the free options. There are three options that I have down here. Windows Virtual PC is totally free. Oracle VM VirtualBox is free. And then VMware Workstation, while it is not free, it is one of the most popular options out there, and you can get a 30-day free trial. One of the suggestions that I would like to make is these tools are particularly helpful in the classroom. What you can do is you can configure multiple virtual machines for your students, and you can allow them to do whatever they want on those virtual machines. What you do is you back up the VHD file for the virtual machine that you make before you give it to your students. You back that VHD file up, you put it somewhere safe, and then later on, when that student blows that virtual server up, you just go in there with a flash drive, you restore the corrected VHD file, that original one you kept, and it's back to normal operation. You don't have to worry about, is this student going to do this? Because we all have those students in our classrooms who take things a little further than we want them to. The mobile device topics in the 800 series are all in the 220-802 exam, and those topics make up 9% of the exam. So if you were to go take that exam today and you've got 100 questions, well, then there's going to be that 9% of them is going to be on mobile devices, and that does include smartphones and tablets. So you need to know a little bit about those. There are 5 basic objectives. I'm just going to let you look at those here because we are going to have future slides where I go into more details about each of these. Establish the basic features of mobile operating systems. Establish basic network connectivity and configure email. Compare and contrast methods for securing mobile devices. Compare and contrast hardware differences in regards to tablets and laptops. And execute and configure mobile device synchronization. For the 802 Objective 3.1, explain the basic features of mobile operating systems. And they're talking about here Android versus iOS. And as all of you know, the iOS operating system is Mac. Android is an open source operating system, while Apple iOS is vendor specific or a closed source. You need to understand basically to that extent. One is open source, one is closed source. And what that means, open source means that programmers can learn a lot more about it and do more to it. With the iOS operating system, you don't have that option. Developers for Android have access to the same APIs used by the operating system, and developers for Apple must use the software development kit and must be registered as Apple developers. Android apps are purchased from the Google Android market, that is now called Google Play, and from other Android app sites, while Apple apps can only be purchased from the Apple App Store. For screen orientation, mobile devices use an accelerometer and or a gyroscope. While only one of these is required in a mobile device, many newer mobile devices are using both because they work together better than they work alone. and you need to understand the different operations that they control. Touchscreen mobile devices require screen calibration. The screen calibration tool will require you to touch the screen in different ways so that the mobile device can learn how you touch the screen. Always remember the answer if a device does not react in an expected manner when you touch the screen. Maybe the wrong app launches, or maybe you're not able to get a button to enable, or you're not getting the right numbers to enter. The answer to that is to do a screen calibration. GPS and geo-tracking. GPS information can be obtained from cell phone towers and from satellites. Keep in mind that keeping the GPS function enabled will cause the battery to be depleted much quicker than having that disabled. Android phones normally use satellites to obtain the GPS data, while iPhones use a combination of satellites, cell phone towers, and Wi-Fi towers to obtain the GPS data. Geo-tracking allows mobile devices to periodically record location information and transmit that information to a centralized server. But there is one thing you need to keep in mind. Consumers have recently raised privacy concerns over the geo-tracking feature, so no one seems to know what's going to happen to it in the coming years. Objective 3.2 is on network connectivity and email in mobile devices. You need to understand that the wireless and cellular data network can be enabled and disabled, and you need to know how to do this in the different types of phones. Where do you go to do it? In your Bluetooth, you need to understand how to enable Bluetooth, how to enable device pairing. You need to know how to find devices for pairing, including entering a PIN code. And then you have to understand how to test Bluetooth connectivity. For email configuration, you need to understand there are several parameters before you set up email on a mobile device that you must know ahead of time. You'll need to know the URL of the incoming and outgoing email server, the port numbers used by the servers, and, if used, the encryption type. You'll also need to know your account details, including username, password, and possibly domain name. Now, the process for setting up email can vary slightly based on the mobile device that you are configuring and the type of account. For some of us, if you have an Exchange or a Gmail account, it is much easier on these devices because they have configuration wizards that just basically ask you questions that you answer, and it's much easier. Objective 3.3, comparing and contrasting the ways of securing devices. Most people don't think about security as much when they have mobile devices, and I was at a conference not too long ago, and I can remember them saying, if you just knew what people could learn from your phone when you go to that public Wi-Fi, it would scare you. The first point they make is passcode lock, and this is the most basic security measure on any mobile device. All that the passcode lock does is it blocks unauthorized users from accessing the device physically if they have the device in hand. In Android phones, this is configured in the settings, location, and security section, and in iOS-based devices such as the iPhone and iPad, it is configured in the settings, general section. Remote wipe is a security measure that ensures that all data on the mobile device can be erased if the mobile device is lost or stolen. For iPhones, there is an iCloud feature that's available in iOS 5 that allows this remote wipe feature, but it does have to be turned on. It isn't turned on by default. Google Apps administrators can perform this function with Google Sync, which is in beta. The last I heard, most third-party Android security apps will have an option that will allow you to locate, lock, or remotely wipe the device. Tied in with remote wipe is locator applications, and the reason they're tied in is you cannot remote wipe a device if you can't locate it. The locator applications is a security measure that uses the GPS feature to locate a lost or stolen mobile device. For iPhones, it's the Find My iPhone feature. For Android devices, there are a number of third-party security applications such as Android Loss, ADG antivirus, or an application called Lookout that will allow you to remotely locate a phone. Hand in hand with those two security measures is remote backup applications. This functionality allows all of the data and applications to be backed up to ensure that the data could be restored if the mobile device was lost or stolen. For iPhones, the backups are managed by iTunes or iCloud, depending on which version that you have. And for Android devices, you have to get a third-party application. Android doesn't have this built in as part of their tools. So you would have to get an application that provides this. Failed login attempt restrictions, most of you are already familiar with this in a Windows environment. This security feature will lock the device after a configured number of failed login attempts using that passcode lock that was the first point at the beginning of the screen. For iPhones, the lock, if you enable this, the lock occurs by default after 6 failed attempts and erases the data after 10 failed attempts, and these are the default settings that can be changed. For Android devices, this feature is not built in, so you will need an app to provide this functionality. Most mobile devices will let you wipe the device content after the configured number of failed login attempts. So you do have the feature, do I just lock the device or do I wipe the device? The next point is about antivirus, and most people do not think of their mobile device as needing antivirus or anti-malware software. Because mobile devices can be corrupted by the same viruses and malware, and so many hackers out there today are targeting these devices because they are so popular and you find them everywhere. I know people that have cell phones that don't have as much to do with their computers anymore because everything is on their cell phone or on their mobile device. Desktop vendors like McAfee and AVG have products designed for mobile devices. But keep in mind, just as with a desktop computer or a laptop, the product must be regularly updated to protect against the latest malware and virus threats. The final point for this objective was patching and OS updates. Patching the operating system and applications is necessary for all mobile devices, just as it is in a computer or laptop. Most mobile devices have a built-in function that will automatically notify you when updates are detected. You need to make sure that your device is updated so that all the latest security patches are installed, because security patches are the most common type of update. But you should not ignore an update just because it does not say it is a security patch, because all of these patches are needed. The next slide is on understanding the hardware differences when you're comparing tablets and laptops, and they don't specifically mention it here, but also understanding about those mobile phones. Most mobile devices do not have field serviceable parts like a desktop computer would. Specialized tools are needed to replace any mobile device hardware, including the screen and internal parts. Repairs, many of you know this, should only be carried out by technicians who are properly trained and have the proper tools. If you have a device repaired by a technician that is not backed by the vendor through some certification or something that proves to you they are backed, the warranty will be voided. Most vendors have this in place now. Mobile devices typically cannot be upgraded. You should purchase upfront the device that you know will meet the maximum level of hardware for your current needs and your future needs, because nothing is worse than buying something that works for you now, but 6 months from now you need more. Most mobile devices are touchscreen devices, which uses 2 technologies, touch flow or multi-touch. With touch flow, finger movement, up, down, left, and right, controls how the screen will scroll. With multi-touch, the screen will recognize multiple touches, which means that more than one finger can work with the interface at the same time. So some of them will have one or the other, many of them may have both. The last point here is understanding that mobile devices use solid-state drives. Most of you, even before multiple mobile devices had them, have seen a USB flash drive, same type of technology. They're much lighter, they're less prone to crashes, and the main reason being is they have no moving parts. So therefore, they are much safer and better to use in mobile devices. Objective 3.5 is all about mobile device synchronization. The types of data that you will be synchronizing when it comes to your mobile devices is listed here: your contacts, your programs or applications, your email, pictures, music, and video. You have to understand the software requirements to install the application on a PC, because if you want to sync it with a PC, the sync application has to be installed on the PC. And you have to understand the connection types. For the connection types, there are two basic ones. You have push synchronization and pull synchronization. Push synchronization, if it is set up, is automatic, and it will require no user effort beyond the initial configuration. Any change that you make at the mobile device will be synced to the other devices at regular intervals that you configure. But remember that push synchronization can consume your battery. So a shorter synchronization time means it's going to update more often, means your battery is going to be consumed faster. So if you, for any reason, that synchronization is important, but you also need to conserve your battery, you should use a longer schedule time. Full synchronization, on the other hand, requires you to actually activate the synchronization. So you have to go in and say synchronize or download now. And at that time, the synchronization process then pulls the new information from the other device. Synchronization can occur via a direct USB connection between the devices, over a Bluetooth connection between the devices, and even over an 802.11 wireless network. Now that's usually natively built into the device, but now there are some specialized synchronization applications that do allow you to use the internet for synchronization. So you just need to research your options out there and decide which one is best for you or your enterprise. Now, I've got a few training suggestions for mobile device. I say install a mobile phone emulator or use your own physical mobile phone. And when I say your own physical device, I know many of you probably have one that is your device, your work phone. And what I mean here is, especially if you're in your classroom environment, try to locate a company in your area who may be rolling out some new mobile devices and taking the company's old ones, because it doesn't really matter if you have an old iPhone 3G or the most current iPhone 5, because once you install the newest iOS on it, it looks the same to the person handling the phone, and it would give you a chance on that phone, even if it wasn't connected to a network of any sort, to play with the software. But let's say you don't have that physical device and you need something for your classroom or for yourself to train you. There are mobile phone emulators out there. There are many free emulators. The Android SDK includes a mobile phone emulator that you can actually install on your PC, and it launches this pretty little window that looks like an Android phone, acts like an Android phone. It was mainly made for application developers who wanted the chance to test those applications on the device before they launched them in the app stores. Free emulator website has some other options, and there are a ton of options listed there. And what I liked about the list is there was even emulators out there to emulate those game consoles that all these boys are crazy about. So you can go to that website. Apple has an iOS simulator that is available at their developer.apple.com, but the last time I checked, it only runs on Mac and OS X. So in order to run that simulator, you have to have a Mac computer, a desktop or something. That's not conducive to many of you, because I know many of you probably don't even have a Mac available to you. Now, BlueStacks emulates an Android, and it has its iOS version emulator in beta. And I gave it internet address right there, bluestacks.com. And then there's something called iPadian. and it emulates an iPad. What you do is you can install these in a lab environment, and then you can let your students play with them, and because they are just emulators, they're not working on a live phone, and you can do screen captures. You can go to that mail and step by step go through the configuration process. You can record the screens. You could then use them, say, in an instructional environment, and then allow your students to go over to the physical computer and play with the emulators. So those are just some of the options. And like I said, research, if you type in mobile device emulator in Google, the results are endless. And of course, as all of you know, just be careful who you go to and what you get, because you don't know everything that you're getting that's coming with it. Now we're going to talk about the performance-based items that CompTIA has introduced. They actually introduced them with the CASP, that Advanced Security Practitioner exam that they released. But many of you, the first time you've seen them is in the A+ exam. They are also now in the Network Plus exam and in the Security Plus exam. I'm going to have a few quotes in here from CompTIA, as you can see. While multiple choice questions can test a candidate's knowledge level on a certain topic, the items typically do not ensure that the candidates have the skills needed to perform a specific job task. In other words, you might ask someone, what are the ports and protocols, and how, what port goes with what protocol. But you have no way in multiple choice testing of truly asking them to configure, say, a rules list that has those ports and protocols that they have to know as part of that rules list. Performance-based items are designed so that the test candidates must demonstrate knowledge by completing the tasks. This is a quote from CompTIA from that blog post. For each performance-based question, the exam prompts the candidate to perform a specific task or solve a specific problem. A simulated environment is then launched in which the candidate completes the required steps. Each question is designed around real-world computer scenarios that will test a candidate's skills and knowledge. Depending on the nature of the exam and the exam question, the simulated environments may include different aspects of IT infrastructure, such as command prompts and Windows or networking environments. Examples of the new item types. We have your basic fill in the blank, and in these items, you have to type commands and often command syntax. So you're asked a question and you're just entering the command or the answer. You have no way of running that command in these fill-in-the-blank type items to see if it's correct. You're just entering your answer. A matching item is those where you are matching things together. You might be matching terms and descriptions, protocols and descriptions, protocols and ports. You see my list, and the list goes on and on and on. Many of you that are instructors or that know the A+ content will go, oh, I could think of about 100 things that you could ask. Well, that's just how many that I'm sure CompTIA thought of as well. The listing items are where the ordered list is important. And in these items, you will often see many different options, not all of which are correct. So you not only have to choose the correct steps, but you have to put those steps after choosing them in the correct order. And think about this as the process steps or installation steps or troubleshooting steps, anything that can be put in a numbered order. Exhibit items. In these items, you're given an exhibit, and you either have to label the components in the exhibit or you are placing the components in the correct place. So anything where a picture does it tells you everything within you. Any chance in a classroom environment you've ever set something down in front of your student and said, tell me what everything is on this? Well, that's what an exhibit question is like. So think of pictures with labels or placing things where they go. Finally, I have what I call a simulator-driven, and in these, the environment closely resembles a live environment, but it provides limited functionality. For example, if you are at a command prompt, you will have only certain commands available. And if you use an incorrect command or what they call an unsupported command, you will be given an error message that says, this command is not supported. And so the process for completing that item is to go through and complete the correct steps by entering the appropriate commands in the correct order, and sometimes retrieving information from one of those commands so that you know what the next step will be. Other possibilities for these type of what I call simulator-driven are things like ACL configuration or rules configuration or any other screen configurations. Think of those mobile device things that you've got to know how to configure. Think of those network things, those security things. Anything that you think of that you've got to know how to configure, it can be simulator-driven. Now, these how to prepare for the new A+ exams, I'm not giving you any wonderful insights that I have, because as you all know, we all sign the non-disclosure agreement when we take the exam. But I can provide you with what CompTIA has provided us all. They had a very interesting blog post recently, and they explained what a performance-based question was in their eyes. They also produced a video and they released it on YouTube, and the video is all about taking a CompTIA exam, but there is a several-minute portion of it where they actually show you what their interpretation of a performance-based question, and even though they're very simple questions that they're showing, it will give you an idea of what the environment looks like, and that I think is what has got the most of us worried out there. Now, also at Transcender, we have released performance-based testing, and we call them interactive items because we have some knowledge. We've done this for a while, and so the type of items that we're actually releasing as part of our A+ package has what we call interactive items, that each one of our practice tests, both the 801 and the 802, does include items that closely resemble what you will see in the live exam.